the southwest corner of Pennsylvania. We appreciate your time this morning on the Washington Journal. Just a 2-hour journal this morning because the House is just coming into session. They're going to continue their work on the Farm Bill. And we go live now to the House. The Senate is working on immigration.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., June 20th, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Ileana Ros-Lehtinen to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Eternal God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. We pause now in your presence and acknowledge our dependence on you. We ask your blessing upon the men and women of this, the people's house. Keep them aware of your presence as they face the tasks of this day, that no burden be too heavy, no duty too difficult, and no work too wearisome. Help them, and indeed help us all, to obey your law, to do your will, and to walk in your way. Grant that they might be good in thought, gracious in word, generous in deed, and great in spirit. Make this a glorious day in which all are glad to be alive, eager to work, and ready to serve you, our great nation, and all our fellow brothers and sisters. May all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House her approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved.
Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, I demand a vote on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal.
The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The journal stands approved.
Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present, and make the point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Duckworth.
Please join me in pledging allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Indiana seek recognition?
To address the House in 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In recognition of the 50th Annual National Small Business Week, I rise today to celebrate the Hoosier small businesses that have been serving our communities for decades. Growing up in South Bend, my parents owned a small appliance repair shop in town, and I learned the value of hard work firsthand. Many of our small businesses were started in Hoosier families and passed on to the next generation. One such place sits right in Elkhart at Bullard's Farm Market. Owned by Kevin Bullard and his wife, Cindy Reardon, Bullard's was started by his father, a sweet corn grower. It began as 8 rows of corn and has grown to cover many acres, including a bakery, greenhouse, and antiques. Bullard's provides fresh, healthy food and local products to Hoosier families. It creates jobs and contributes to our economic engine. Awarded Business of the Year by the Greater Elkhart Chamber of Commerce, Bullard's is a shining example of a Hoosier business. On Small Business Saturday, I look forward to visiting Bullard's and hope you'll join me in supporting all small businesses to make sure their doors stay open for generations to come. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Without
Without objection, so recognized.
Thank you, ma'am. Madam Speaker, very soon, thousands of folks in my district in Georgia, and even more across the state, will be furloughed as a result of the budget sequester. Studies have shown that the sequester will cost the Georgia economy approximately $107 million. Meanwhile, reports circulated this week that President Obama's upcoming trip to Africa will cost the taxpayers nearly $100 million. Madam Speaker, no one here questions the need for security for our Commander-in-Chief, but we do question the need for such expensive trips when so many folks across the country are being forced to cut back because Congress can't get its act together. A trip of this magnitude isn't unusual, but these are hard times. $100 million could be better used to keep folks on the job. I urge the President and everyone at the federal level to lead by example and not take the fact that Congress can't get its act together and rub that in the faces of hard-working Americans. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, recently we've learned that the NSA, what I call the National Surveillance Agency, seized millions of phone records of Americans to try to find a few bad guys. Overreaching and unconstitutional, in my opinion. It violates the right of privacy. FBI Director Mueller has now confirmed what many of us already believed, that the FBI has used drones domestically to peep on Americans. Who are they spying on? Do they have probable cause? Do they have a warrant from a judge? We don't know. Madam Speaker, by 2030, there will be 30,000 drones cruising, filming, spying, snooping, looking, and hovering over America's skies. So Congress needs to regulate drone use to protect the right of privacy and ensure the Fourth Amendment is actually protected. Congresswoman Loughran and I have filed the Preserving American Privacy Act to make government snoops and private entities follow the Constitution in the use of drones. We must regulate lawful and unlawful drone use because drone laws are needed to keep the peeping tomcrats out of our business. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, the cuts we are considering to snap $20.5 billion will be devastating for many American families. There is little room to cut this vital program. The average benefit is only $4.50 a day, just $1.50 a meal. These cuts will slash benefits to 2 million Americans and cut more than 200,000 children off the school lunch and school breakfast program. This is a very personal issue for me. I was one of those children. After my father lost his job for several years when I was a teenager, food stamps, school breakfast, and school lunch were the only things that saved me. They were there for me so I could worry about school instead of my empty stomach. They nourished me so I could develop the skills to serve my country for the next 20 years, all the way here to Congress. I believe that in the wealthiest nation in the world, no American child should go hungry to school, and no parent should have to make the difficult decision between paying rent or paying for groceries. Charities like the Church of the Holy Spirit Food Pantry in Schaumburg are already stretched to the limit, trying to meet the needs of our communities during these tough economic times. This means that hungry Americans will have nowhere else to turn, and I ask my colleagues to reject these draconian cuts. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, today the great state of West Virginia is celebrating its 150th year. Birthday. The unique history of the Mountain State is a source of pride for all West Virginians. On this day in 1863, West Virginia entered the Union to become the 35th state. It is the only state born during that divisive war between the states, and the only state formed by presidential decree. From these challenging years, our state has become a significant contributor to America's economy. West Virginia's natural resources, coal, oil, natural gas, and timber, have played an integral role in the industrialization of our country. Now, in addition to providing energy to continue fueling our nation's economy, West Virginia has grown into a leader in healthcare, research, education, biotech, aerospace, and many other diverse industries. The Mountain State's natural beauty also attracts people from all around the world to visit and enjoy its breathtaking scenery. Mr. Speaker, today West Virginia takes special pride in our wild and wonderful state. We celebrate our past and look forward to the future. Happy birthday, West Virginia. Here's to the next 150 years. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today on behalf of many, many Illinois residents and 1 in 7 American families in opposing the $20.5 billion cut to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program in this year's Farm Bill. I have always believed that in America where we're in this together is much better than in America where we're on our own. For 46 million low-income Americans, SNAP is a helping hand, and it's our nation's most important anti-hunger program. It's also the most effective defense against the steep rise in extreme poverty in America. Between 1996 and 2011, SNAP kept more households with children out of extreme poverty than any other government program. I have ended my participation in the SNAP Challenge, where I lived on $4.50 worth of food a day. While I merely participated in this as a challenge, I often thought about the many families for whom this is an everyday reality. SNAP isn't a bailout. SNAP isn't a handout. SNAP is an assist. It's a bridge over troubled water, and there is still more we can do. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Well, Madam Speaker, I want to recognize the achievements of the Edina High School girls golf team. This talented group of young ladies recently demonstrated extreme passion and dedication and intensity in a commanding win in this year's Minnesota State High School golf tournament. The Edina girls team should be proud not only for being named winners of this year's tournament, but also for having the lowest overall score in state tournament history. This now brings the Hornets championship total to 8, the most ever in Minnesota. These student athletes are great role models, and they're also setting themselves up to have a positive standard for all of their classmates. Congratulations to the team and congratulations to the coaches for their hard work and their dedication and for this year's big win. And go Hornets. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, today I rise to speak out against the drastic cuts proposed to the SNAP program, a lifeline that millions of Americans rely on. The Farm Bill being debated today would cut over $20 billion over 10 years from SNAP, a program that ensures that children, seniors, and families struggling to make ends meet don't have to go without food. The Center for Budget and Policy Priorities estimates that these cuts would leave 2 million Americans without essential food assistance and cut 200,000 children from the school lunch program. Food pantries in all corners of my district tell me that they are already struggling to keep up with the need. The Interfaith Food Pantry in Aurora, Illinois, provides food assistance to 750 families each week. 40% of those families also get SNAP benefits, which are unfortunately insufficient to meet their food needs. If these SNAP cuts are implemented, more families will be forced to turn to volunteer-run pantries, which are already stretched dangerously thin, and many people will have nowhere to turn. Madam Speaker, there is a long list of federal programs for which the benefits are uncertain, or for which the benefits are certain to be delivered to narrow groups for which the need is unclear. SNAP is not one of these, and I urge my colleagues to reconsider these drastic cuts. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Request permission to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise to recognize the more than 1,600 young men and women who have come to our capital from across America this week to participate in the 49th Annual Electric Cooperative Youth Tour. These high school juniors and seniors that you see around the Capitol this week are here to get firsthand insights about our nation's government and its political process and gain a greater understanding of our history. They will meet with their representatives and senators and watch Congress in action from the galleries, and also visit many memorials and the museums. I look forward to meeting with the 106 students from the state of Georgia, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. These students coming from the Electric Cooperative Tour are part of a great tradition. In 1957, Texas Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson inspired the youth tour when he addressed the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association meeting in Chicago. The senator and future president declared, quote, "If one thing comes out of this meeting, it will be sending youngsters to the nation's capitals where they can actually see what the flag stands for and represents." So every June for the past 49 years, over 50,000 young citizens and future leaders have put those words into action. And you can see the results of this tradition right here on the Capitol. Several of the groups have spawned congressional aides and elected representatives themselves. Back home in Georgia, the chairman of our State House Appropriations Committee, Terry England, is a prime example of someone who had the desire for public office and ran for elected office when it was fueled as a student when he came up here on the Electric Co-op Tour some 20 years ago. I congratulate Terry and many and thousands of others just like him who have engaged in this great tour, and I commend the National Electric Cooperative Youth Tour and thank the Georgia EMCs for all the great work they are doing in developing America's youth.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does a gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from California is recognized.
Today I rise to commemorate the lives lost in the tragic shooting rampage on the streets of Santa Monica and at Santa Monica College. On June 7, Samir Zawahiri, Chris Zawahiri, Marcello Franco, Carlos Navarro Franco, Margarita Gomez lost their lives. We take a moment to honor them and make a promise that we will remember them. I want to express my condolences to the victims' families. Your losses are Los Angeles losses, and we grieve with you. There were many wounded, and we send our best wishes for a full and speedy recovery. I also rise to commend the heroic actions of our first responders. Without their fearless response, many more lives could have been lost. We thank these first responders who arrived on the scene and bravely protected us all. Our nation expresses its gratitude. We are losing too many of our fellow citizens to gun violence. We must stop this cycle. My colleagues in Congress must come together to enact common sense reforms, including comprehensive background checks. We must address the mental health needs of our community. We cannot allow the tragedy that occurred in Santa Monica to be repeated. The lives lost in Santa Monica cannot just be another statistic. They must inspire us to make our community and our nation safer and more secure for everyone.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Pursuant to House Resolution 271 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 1947. Will the gentlewoman from Florida, Mrs. Ross Layton, please resume the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 1947, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to provide for the reform and continuation of agricultural and other programs of the Department of Agriculture through fiscal year 2018 and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose on Wednesday, June 19, 2013, Amendment number 58, printed in Part B of House Report 113-117, offered by the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, had been disposed of. It is now in order to consider Amendment number 98, printed in Part B of House Report 113-117. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise to offer my amendment.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Part B, Amendment number 98, printed in House Report number 113-117, offered by Mr. Pitts of Pennsylvania.
Pursuant to House Resolution 271, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts, and a member opposed, each will control 10 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And those of us in support of my amendment, I will divide 5 minutes under the control of Congressman Danny Davis, 5 minutes on my side. I rise in support of my amendment, and one that would reform our government's sugar program. For too long, we've seen these subsidies and market protections drive up costs on taxpayers, consumers, and businesses. Let me highlight some of the costs now. Consumers are paying an extra $3.5 billion a year to subsidize this policy. Taxpayers are set to foot a bill of $239 million over the next several years, according to the CBO. The CBO estimated our amendment would save $73 million. American workers are paying the price in job losses. Nearly 127,000 jobs were lost by sugar-using industries between 1997 and 2011. At risk are an additional 600,000 manufacturing jobs. My amendment would help get the price of sugar closer to the world price. It does so by reforming the sugar program, not repealing it. American sugar is still going to have its support program, much the same as it did before the 2008 Farm Bill. We're simply returning to those policies in order to get a more competitive price, one that will help consumers, manufacturers, and even growers. Under the 2008 Farm Bill, refined sugar prices have averaged 68% more than under the 2002 Farm Bill. Our detractors are quick to point out that sugar prices are falling, but then they neglect to tell the taxpayer that they are set to bail out the sugar industry, possibly by amounts of $100 million a year in the coming years. So at the same time this reckless policy sticks the cost of subsidies to consumers, we are set to start spending taxpayer money on supporting sugar farmers, even while the price of U.S. sugar was 64% higher than the world price last year. All we are seeking to do is to return the sugar program to what it was under the 2002 Farm Bill policy. I'm not sure about you, but I don't remember having any trouble getting sugar into my coffee in 2008. But since the last Farm Bill, companies have been struggling to find affordable sugar, so much so that Canada has actively been advertising to our manufacturing base that they have access to cheaper sugar. Furthermore, the inflated price of sugar has incentivized Mexico to dump sugar into our market. So we're losing jobs to the north, we're getting hit from foreign sugar from the south due to this reckless policy, so let's reform it. Let's get back to the free market into the sugar market. Let's get American jobs to stay here. Let's save consumers and taxpayers money. Let's reform our sugar policy, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman reserves the balance of his time.
I'm sorry, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Minnesota seeks recognition.
Madam Chair, I'd like to claim the time in opposition.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Chair, I'd like to recognize the chairman of the House Agriculture Committee for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Chairman, we hear a lot from the proponents of this amendment about moving American companies to Mexico and to Canada. But that has nothing to do with the price of sugar. It has everything to do with labor cost, health care cost, and trying to get every penny out of the American farmer. Have any of you seen the price of sugar, cakes, cookies plummet over the last few years as sugar prices have decreased by 55%? No, you haven't. You'll hear a lot from the proponents of this amendment about the high prices of sugar. So high indeed that restaurants give it away, that you can buy a 5-pound bag of sugar for almost nothing. The idea that adopting this amendment is going to somehow create a free market for sugar is ludicrous. The world sugar market is one of the most distorted markets in the world. Adopting this amendment or even repealing sugar policy would do nothing but subject the U.S. to that distorted market, even more than we are today. Cost a lot of farmers their livelihoods, cost this country an industry with all the jobs and economic activity that go with it. Let's be quite clear. The U.S. is already one of the largest importers of sugar in the world. The second argument that we are all of a sudden going to... The gentleman give me 1 more minute. One more?
The gentleman's time has expired. If the gentleman...
I would yield gentleman another minute.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
The second argument is that we are all of a sudden going to have cheaper sugar if we adopt this amendment. What bothers me the most about this argument is that it was made when sugar prices were 55% higher, and it made just the same when prices are in the tank. How cheap is cheap enough for those who are backing this amendment? They claim that consumers are being bilked by the high price of sugar. But have any of our colleagues noticed a drop in the price of candy bars as manufacturers faithfully pass along to consumers the savings from a 55% drop in sugar prices? Of course not. Sugar policy has operated at zero cost to the taxpayers for 10 years now. Our farmers are efficient and competitive. Consumers in this country enjoy cheaper sugar than anywhere else in the world, and sugar users enjoy a reliable source of safe sugar. Candy makers are reporting strong profits as sugar farmers and processors struggle. Neither today's climate nor the climate of 55% higher prices was caused by sugar policy. It was caused by conditions in a distorted global market. All sugar policy does is provide, I urge my colleagues to reject the amendment.
The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. Who seeks time? The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Madam.
Does the gentleman seek to, without objection, you're recognized. Would you, are you seeking the 5 minutes?
No, I'm actually going to yield myself 2 minutes and reserve the rest.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's be clear, unequivocally and without a doubt. We know that the sugar subsidy raises the price of sugar on the domestic market in this country. I know that I have lost out of my congressional district major candy makers and food processors who left town not because of labor costs, not because of any rifts, but because they were paying so much for the price of sugar that they knew that if they went to Mexico, if they went to Canada, that they could get sugar at a much lower price. I don't know why we help 4,000 sugar growers at the expense of 600,000 workers in America. I say vote yes for the Pitts, Davis, Blumenauer, Goodlatte amendment, that when you do that, you are helping the guy who gets a cup of coffee and needs to use sugar for the sweetener. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Illinois reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Madam Chair, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Michigan for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Chair, I rise in opposition to this amendment. This is nothing but an attack on the thousands of family farms in my district and across the country. The district I represent is home to Michigan Sugar, a co-op owned by 900 American family farmers. The idea of big sugar is flat out false. To compare a co-op, a grower's co-op, such as Michigan Sugar, to a large multinational corporation is fallacy and wrong. Back in my district, when I visit these hardworking third and fourth generation farmers, all they ask for is a fair and even playing field. These farmers work hard, they play by the rules, and they shouldn't be punished as this amendment would do. That's why I stand with the American family farms and not foreign government subsidized sugar. Big corporate food processors are not moving overseas because of sugar costs. They are moving overseas to avoid providing health care and living wages to their workers. Furthermore, if big business is able to target one crop at a time, the entire Farm Bill loses its worth.
Has expired.
If you support family farms,
Gentleman
you will oppose
from
this
Minnesota
amendment.
reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield 1.5 minutes to the distinguished Vice Chair of the Ag Committee, Congressman Goodlatte.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, this Farm Bill reforms many commodity programs. It makes major policy changes that leave no commodity untouched except for one. This bill makes absolutely no change to the sugar program. In fact, in the sugar program wasn't even given the scrutiny of an audit hearing. Under this bill, we are being asked to demand sacrifices from farmers in our districts. Wheat, corn, soybeans, cotton, peanuts, rice. These commodities and more are undergoing major changes and contributing to the deficit reduction in this bill, but we're asked to believe that the sugar program and the sugar program alone is so perfect that it must be left untouched. It cannot be reformed or even discussed. I respectfully disagree. The sugar program needs to be reformed for many reasons. First, all serious studies show that the sugar program increases food costs. Economists at Iowa State University put this consumer cost at up to $3.5 billion a year for the first 4 years of the 2008 Farm Bill. Second, because it harms the competitiveness of U.S. food manufacturing, the sugar program costs jobs. The Iowa State study estimated that as many as 20,000 new jobs a year could be created if sugar policy were fully reformed. And the U.S. Department of Commerce found that for every sugar industry job saved by the program, 3 good manufacturing jobs were lost. Third, current sugar policy may not have cost taxpayers at the moment, but the Congressional Budget Office projects that it will in the future. The Feedstock Flexibility Program, which was added to the sugar policy in 2008, is forecast to cost $193 million. Fourth, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Madam Chair, I please now to recognize the chairman of the subcommittee that deals with this, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway.
For how much
1
time?
minute. 1
The
minute.
gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. Sugar manufacturers are not going broke. I mean, sugar users and folks who buy it by the ton are not going broke. If you look at Hershey, which is one of the main proponents for changing this policy, 2007 they made $217 million. I don't begrudge them that. I wish I were a shareholder. 2012, they made $660 million, a threefold increase in their prices. Their own annual report says the sugar costs went from 54 cents a pound to 37 cents a pound, and that would not be reflected in their prices because of the way they manage the rest of their business. If the sugar buyers were actually going broke, then that would be reflected in one of the largest sugar users, which is Hershey. This is about protecting American producers, folks, men and women who get up every morning to fight for American agriculture and grow sugar, process sugar, so that you and I can pick it up off a table free and walk out of a restaurant with it. The current policy works. Often, if it's not broke, don't fix it. This also fits the category as if a fellow's down, you don't kick him. The sugar industry is down right now because of 55%, 52% decrease in the price of sugar. Let's don't kick them while they're down. This current policy works. Let's don't fix it because it's not broken. And the $38 million in estimated prorated over the 10 years is a bargain. Oppose this amendment.
The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now give 1 minute to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Moran.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Madam Chairwoman, I don't have any sugar manufacturing jobs in my district, let alone any sugar beet farms or sugar cane fields. But all of my constituents and all of the constituents of every member of this body pay a share of the $3.5 billion annual hidden food tax on consumers. So it seems to me that's what this is about. And to go from the personal to the national, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce, for each sugar production job saved, this sugar program has eliminated 3 jobs in food manufacturing. 3 jobs lost for every job saved. So if we're really about creating jobs and not losing them, we ought to reform this sugar program. Current policy keeps sugar prices higher than the world market price, and that encourages food manufacturing jobs to move offshore. As a result, between 1997 and 2011, 127,000 jobs were lost in segments of the food and beverage industries that use sugar to make their products. And I object, Madam Chairwoman, to the idea of moving $239 million for a sugar to ethanol mandate. Ought to be eliminated. We ought to reform the program. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Madam Chair, I'd now be pleased to recognize the gentleman from New York, a good friend of the American farmer and agriculture, Mr. Engel, for 1 minute.
Mr. Engel is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank my friend for yielding to me, and Madam Chair, I rise in opposition to the Pitts Amendment. The proponents of the amendment claim that sugar prices are too high, but U.S. raw sugar prices have dropped by more than half just since the fall of 2011. In 2004, more than 200 people lost their jobs when the Domino Sugar plant in Brooklyn, New York, closed its doors. That plant predated the Brooklyn Bridge, it outlasted the Brooklyn Dodgers, and now it's gone, and so are the paychecks that its employees used to collect. I have a sugar refinery in my district in Yonkers, New York, and I don't want the same thing to happen to them. The sugar industry supports 142,000 jobs in 22 states, including 300 at this plant in my district. Our current policy supports this industry at no cost to the taxpayers. In fact, the USDA has predicted 0 cost increase over the next 10 years. So I come from the school that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Until we have a level playing field on the world market, we must continue our current sugar policy. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the amendment.
Mr. Connolly, the gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota has 5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Pennsylvania has 30 seconds remaining. And the gentleman from Illinois has 2.5 minutes remaining. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Madam Speaker, I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensling, for, you say 30 seconds that I have left?
The gentleman has 30 seconds remaining. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
What happened?
Madam Chairman, we've all heard the phrase American as apple pie, but it is shameful to think that every American pie has baked into it Soviet-style sugar. We have a Byzantine array of government production quotas, import quotas, mandatory target prices. And what does it do? It destroys 3 jobs for every 1 it creates and transfers millions of dollars from working Americans to 6,000 sugar growers. It is time for us to put American back into American as apple pie. Let's support the amendment from the gentleman of Pennsylvania.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania's time has expired. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Madam Chair, I'm now pleased to recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pohl, for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Food and candy opponents of U.S. sugar policy would like to expose American sugar farmers to distorted world dump market for sugar. But the United States sugar growers are already exposed. Mexico has unlimited access to the United States market. And one thing that hasn't been said, 20% of the Mexican sugar industry is owned by the Mexican government. Mexico owns and operates its sugar industry, which is 5 times larger than the Texas sugar producing industry. And as this chart shows, since 2008, Mexico has gotten unlimited access to the United States sugar market. And in fact, that the prices of sugar are the same prices as they were in the 1980s. my friends on both sides that proposed this amendment say we need a more free market. Well, the United States cannot unilaterally disarm that jeopardizes 142,000 jobs and leaves us dependent on the Brazilian and Mexican food industry that is run by the Mexican government. This amendment does not promote free trade or free market. It promotes a government-run industry from Mexico and Brazil. I yield back. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. Gentleman from Illinois seek recognition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I keep hearing if it's not broken, don't fix it. Well, I can tell you for the 600,000 people whose jobs are at risk when their companies move out of the country, that seems like broken to me. I'd now like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, and a minute and a half back to Mr. Pitts.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, there's been assertions that somehow the American sugar industry is down. Well, there are because of the changes that were made in the last Farm Bill, prices soared up to 92%. And so there was a temporary increase in American sugar, which created some downward pressure, which in fact is going to require the American taxpayer to bail out, to put in the next several years because of the sugar program's feedstock flexibility. We're talking about returning to the 2002 law. Every independent economist agrees that the American consumer is paying from $2 billion to $3.5 billion excess. The reason jobs are going to Canada is not because they pay less, it's because the sugar price is less. There are more jobs in the industry that use sugar than produce it. We're merely asking to return to the 2002 provisions, which were generous enough. Someday we will deregulate. Someday we will truly reform. But in the short term, this is a reasonable accommodation.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Minnesota reserves, or the gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Madam Chair, I'm now pleased to recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Cassidy, for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I oppose this amendment. We advocates for Americans farmers know that we need free world markets, but the proponents of this amendment ignore that other countries such as Brazil subsidize their sugar industry as much as $3 billion per year. This amendment unilaterally disarms our economy. By doing so, it threatens 142,000 farmer jobs, potentially places the U.S. consumer at the mercy of market manipulation by foreign governments. At stake is our food security, 142,000 jobs, and the American consumer. By eliminating this program, which operates at zero cost to the American taxpayer, we hamstring the ability of our farmers to provide food security for our people. I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There's nothing in the amendment that will bring an additional ounce of sugar onto our shores without explicit approval of the Secretary of Agriculture. And I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Dent.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I must take exception to some of the remarks I've heard here today. This amendment is absolutely necessary for this country, for the consumer. We're talking about saving consumers $3.5 billion a year, saving 20,000 manufacturing jobs, and I must strenuously object to those who say the price of sugar is so low. Let me tell you what's going to happen. When the price of sugar drops below a certain level, the federal government will buy that excess sugar, then sell it to ethanol producers at a loss. The taxpayer and the consumer is royally abused twice. This is protectionism at its worst. We all know it. It's time to reform this program. This is not a zero-zero policy, as the proponents claim. This is going to cost taxpayers $239 million over the next several years. That's according to CBO. $80 million of taxpayer-funded bailout could come as soon as later this year. This issue is about protecting manufacturing jobs, making sure that we have something closer to a market-based price. I represent Hershey, Pennsylvania. I just heard a statement saying those sugar packets handed out at the restaurant are free. Well, that cost is built into the meal that you eat. It's absurd. It is absolutely absurd. We are losing jobs to countries that have more market-based sugar policies. I
has
urge strong
expired.
support for the Pitts, Goodlatte, Davis, Blumenauer
The
amendment. Thank you. I
gentleman
yield
from
back.
Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Madam Chair, I'm now pleased to recognize the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Hanabusa, for 1 minute.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I represent a state that was literally built on sugar, and we are now down to one sugar-producing company in the whole state. We do not have the sugar canes blowing in the wind as we have in the past. What this amendment is going to do is really, when you think about it, do away with a program that doesn't cost the taxpayers anything. It is an agreement between the USDA and the sugar producers to ensure that the agriculture industry remains stable. Think about it. Why do you want to do away with something that doesn't cost us anything at this point in time, produces jobs, and is essential, and instead give way to world markets that are subsidized? What will happen when those subsidies are deemed to be no longer necessary because of the fact that there is nothing in the United States anymore? Think about it. We need to keep agriculture strong. That is what this is all about. It doesn't cost taxpayers anything. This is a program that clearly works, keeps this industry alive and well, so it makes no sense.
Has expired.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from who seeks recognition? The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield the balance of our time to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Fleischman.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I represent the 3rd District of Tennessee. We've heard a great debate today. Let's be clear. The numbers are self-evident. When the world price of sugar compared to the United States price of sugar is so out of kilter, since reform, 72, 91, 77, and 63% since 2008, we cannot compete in America based on the world price. It's a commodity. It's an agreement. I urge strong support of this amendment. We've got American jobs at stake. We cannot compete if this program continues. Jobs will leave America. Let's support this amendment. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania's time has expired. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Madam Chair, could I inquire how much time I have?
The gentleman has 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm now pleased to recognize my good friend across the border in North Dakota, Mr. Kramer, for 1 minute.
The gentleman from North Dakota is recognized for 2 minutes.
Yeah, we'll go
for 1 minute, excuse me.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. The idea that somehow this amendment creates free and fair trade is a fallacy, and the idea that somehow sugar has not been reformed in recent years and decades is also a fallacy. The greatest reformation of the sugar program is the North American Free Trade Agreement that gave access to U.S. markets completely, not only to the sugar farmers south of us, but the governments of Mexico and Brazil. And the idea that a no-net cost program like the American sugar program is somehow a great advantage over countries like Brazil that subsidize with tax dollars $2.5 to $3 billion per year, I think is the most distorting fact in this entire debate. I rise to oppose this amendment and encourage my colleagues to do the same, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Madam Chair, am I the only one left with time?
The gentleman is correct.
Well, I will close then, and I want to thank my colleagues for their statements. I represent an area that's the biggest sugar-producing area in the country, and I agree with what's been said by my colleagues. People need to understand that every country that produces sugar in the world has some intervention in the sugar market. So for us to unilaterally disarm is all we're going to do is give away our jobs and our industry to other countries. We import sugar from 41 countries, sugar that we could make in the United States. 15% of our market we have given to other people. We've opened up the market to Mexico, you know, and yet we have had a no net cost program until this year when sugar prices have collapsed, which is not our fault. It's what's going on in Brazil and other places. So, you know, if this is just, you know, for people to be complaining that sugar prices are too high when right now they're about as low as they've ever been is kind of crazy. So I ask my colleagues to reject this amendment and continue a policy that works, is good for America, good for the farmers, good for the workers, good for the economy. Yield back.
The gentleman yields back. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Request yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, the proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part B of House Report 113-117, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 18 by Mr. Brooks of Alabama. Amendment number 25 by Mr. Butterfield of North Carolina. Amendment number 26 by Mr. Marino of Pennsylvania. Amendment number 30 by Mr. Schwartz of Arizona. Amendment number 32 by Mr. Tierney of Massachusetts. Amendment number 37 by Mr. Polis of Colorado. Amendment number 38 by Mr. Garamendi of California. Amendment number 41 by Mr. Marino of Pennsylvania. Amendment number 43 by Mr. McClintock of California. Amendment number 44 by Mr. Gibson of New York. Amendment number 45 by Ms. Kowalski of Indiana. Amendment number 46 by Mr. Courtney of Connecticut. Amendment number 47 by Mr. Kind of Wisconsin. Amendment number 48 by Mr. Carney of Delaware. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 18, printed in Part B of House Report 113-117 by the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Part B, Amendment number 18, printed in House Report number 113-117, offered by Mr. Brooks of Alabama.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is offered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
So the House taking the first recorded votes of the day today as they continue working on the Farm Bill this week. 14 votes in this series. As you heard, members have been debating amendments over the past few days, and votes on those amendments happening over the next few hours. We do expect work to wrap up on the Farm Bill today, a scheduled final passage vote later today. Members right now voting on the amendment offered by Congressman Mo Brooks of Alabama. It would eliminate a program that promotes the export of certain agricultural products and commodities to developing international markets. And again, this will be a 15-minute vote. After this, 2-minute votes on amendments. As voting continues, we will show you debate on the amendment yesterday brought by Democrat Congressman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts. It deals with the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. His amendment would have restored the $20.5 billion in funding that's set to be eliminated in the bill. In the past, SNAP was referred to as food stamps. 46 million Americans use monthly benefits from food stamps. Here's a part of that debate from yesterday.
This is a debate about values and priorities. This amendment would restore the $20.5 billion in cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, formerly known as food stamps. It would restore those cuts by eliminating or reducing some of the wasteful, excessive subsidies to highly profitable big agribusiness. Not only that, the amendment would actually reduce the deficit by $12 billion beyond the base bill. At a time when millions of Americans are struggling with unemployment, with poverty and with hunger, the Farm Bill before us today would cause 2 million of our neighbors to lose their SNAP benefits. It would kick 210,000 kids off of the free school breakfast and lunch program. That's a rotten thing to do. Mr. Lucas and others will argue that these SNAP cuts will only force poor people to fill out a few more forms, to jump through a few more hoops, to get the assistance that they need to qualify for. Let's think about that for a minute. Aren't we a country that reaches out to those in need? When Americans see their neighbors having a hard time, don't we show up to help without being asked? Our churches and our food banks are doing extraordinary work, but they are already stretched to the limit. Values and priorities. Critics of the SNAP program talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. But SNAP is one of the most efficiently run government programs we have. And some of the errors in SNAP are a result of people getting less help than they qualify for. The base bill would cut $2 billion per year from a program that helps struggling families put food on the table. $2 billion. I would remind my colleagues that we spend more than $2 billion every single week propping up a corrupt Karzai government in Afghanistan. Some people who have no problem with nation building in Afghanistan turn their backs on nation building here at home. Values and priorities. 50 million Americans struggle with hunger. 17 million of those are our children. Hunger costs our nation dearly, over $100 billion a year in avoidable health care costs, lost productivity, and hungry kids who can't learn in school. SNAP is one tool to address hunger in America. Like every other human endeavor, it is not perfect. It can be improved, but it would be short-sighted and cruel to make hunger worse in America, which is exactly what this bill would do. If we want to reduce spending on SNAP, the best way to do that is to strengthen our economy, to invest in putting people back to work. Values and priorities, Mr. Chair. Let us stay true to our values of compassion and decency and justice. Let us give priority to those among us who are struggling in these hard times, to the least of these. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman. Is recognized. Mr. Chairman, I recognize the Subcommittee Chairman of Primary Jurisdiction from Iowa, Mr. King, for 2 minutes. The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the Chairman of the Ag Committee for yielding, and I want to also thank him for his leadership on this bill. This is a carefully balanced bill that we have, and I don't challenge the convictions of the gentleman from Massachusetts. We've had enough exchanges on this topic matter to know that we have a difference of opinion without a difference in disagreeable personalities by any means. However, when I came to this Congress a little more than a decade ago, I was looking already at this growth in then food stamps. And the number that I memorized at the time is that there were 19 million people on food stamps. That was a lot of people. Our population hasn't grown so much that it ought to grow to 48 million people. But when we see the expansion of the dependency class in America, and you add this to the 79 other means-tested welfare programs that we have in the United States, and each time you add another brick to that wall, it's a barrier to people that might go out and succeed. And we're of the same heart here. We don't want people who need them and people who deserve them to go without SNAP benefits. On the other hand, we don't want to hand these out to people that are gaming the system, so to speak. So we tightened the qualifications down on SNAP, and we've done so for a number of reasons. And one of them is the reports of a neon sign up on a tattoo parlor, "We take EBT cards." And you know, you have the reports of an individual who bailed himself out of jail with an EBT card. I don't think that we want to borrow money from the Chinese to fund such a thing. I think those people can figure out how to bail themselves out and how to pay their own tattoos. But instead, we tighten this down. It's a savings of $20.5 billion. It's a tough enough negotiation to get to that point. I don't know what the gentleman from Massachusetts would say is enough. And maybe I don't know what I would say was too little. But someplace in between his opinion and mine is where we've settled today on this $20.5 billion that come out of this top line that is roughly 80% of the overall benefits that are in this bill. And so it's carefully balanced, it's carefully negotiated, it's something that has had the cooperation with the ranking member on as well. And I think it's an important thing for us to understand that you can't simply be spending advertising dollars out there to sign more people up on food stamps, and that's what our Secretary of Agriculture has been doing. In this bill, we eliminate the advertisement to sign people up on food stamps. That's a good thing. If people need it, they're going to figure out how to sign it up without somebody knocking on their door or advertising in the newspaper or on the radio or on the TV. And so we tighten up the system. We keep the resources to the people that need them, and we reduce this thing, however marginally. It's a 2.5% reduction in this massive growth from 19 million to 48 million. That's not too much to ask, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself 30 seconds.
You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, let me again remind my colleagues, the reason why we've seen an uptick in the number of people registered for SNAP is because we are coming out of this recession, the worst economy we've had since the Great Depression. The gentleman from Iowa says this is a carefully negotiated, carefully studied compromise. We didn't have a single hearing on it, not in his subcommittee and not in the full committee. And the people we're talking about here are people who are good, honorable, decent Americans who are going to lose their benefit. CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, says 2 million people will lose their benefits. These aren't targeted at people who somehow abuse the system. These are just 2 million people lose their benefits, 200,000 kids off the free breakfast and lunch. That's wrong. Let him go next on you next.
Gentleman from Oklahoma. Mr. Chairman, I yield to the gentleman, Mr. Ribble, 2 minutes. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the Chairman Lucas for yielding here. SNAP is an incredibly important program in the United States. I don't think there's anybody that I've met on my side of the aisle or on theirs, and I particularly appreciate Mr. Govern's position on the fact that we need to make sure that hungry children in this country get food to eat. We want them to have good, healthy meals. However, the data doesn't support, on behalf of the taxpayer, that we continue to increase funding for SNAP. And in fact, if you follow the red line here, that's unemployment in America. And you see during the recession, unemployment went up, as did SNAP spending, almost exactly at the same ratio. And then when unemployment, as the economy began to recover, and unemployment went down, as did poverty went down, SNAP funding continued to go up. And in fact, in 2008 to 2011, SNAP funding went up 119%, while poverty went up only 16%. Between 2010 and 2011, poverty actually went down, while SNAP spending went up. It's not just an either-or, Mr. Chairman, that we can either provide food for the poor or charge the taxpayer money. We need to do both, but as fiduciaries of the taxpayers' dollars, we must do it reasonably. We don't want any child to go without food. But we recognize that the economy has begun to recover since 2009, where we were spending only $53 billion on SNAP, if only is the appropriate word. Today we're going to be spending $82 billion on SNAP. Unemployment went from 10.2% in 2009 down to 7.6% today. Under this basis, I wonder at what point could we ever have SNAP go down. Now here's the reality. We keep talking about $20 billion. In fact, next year, with a $2 billion cut annually, we won't even roll SNAP back effectively 1 year, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm proud to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, a member of the Agriculture Committee, Mr. Schrader.
The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I believe strongly that we've got a debt deficit problem. I think most Americans agree with that. But I don't think most Americans would agree that we balance our deficit on the backs of the most vulnerable people out there, particularly the children. As was alluded to a moment ago by my good friend from Wisconsin, half of the people on food stamps are children. Children. They didn't get a job. They're still hungry. The other point I think is well known by Americans that while unemployment may have gone down, there's a lot of underemployed people. And there's a lot of people that have given up searching for work because the recession lingers. The real world is that the SNAP program is a lagging indicator. People struggle. They try and keep their job. They go into savings. They rely on friends. And then after several years, they lose their house. Maybe they've already lost their job. And then they need food stamps. I think it's egregious that we would deny them that. Now, there may be some inefficiencies in the program. We've been working on that for years. There's an error rate in my home state of Oregon that we're proud to say we've driven down. We were guilty of not overseeing the program. That's been driven down. We should be rewarding good behavior, not penalizing it at the end of the day. I still have over 20% of my folks in Oregon. They're on food stamps. And that has not changed. And that's not because they're glad to be on food stamps. My folks want a job. They want to be able to feed their own families. But the real world is this was a horrible recession, the worst recession since the Great Depression. And you don't balance that budget on the backs of these kids. If we had had a chance to vote on another food stamp bill that may have gotten down to the Senate levels of reductions, I think you wouldn't see some folks here worried about it. But this is the only game in town trying to protect vulnerable Americans. There's other ways to cut the program. The direct payments that we did in the Ag Committee, that's the way to go about it, not with the most vulnerable population. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma. Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the changes made to SNAP are directed at reducing fraud, not at those in true need. And affecting the inefficiencies that have been dealing with for years, we have the chance to affect those inefficiencies right now in this year's Farm Bill, not 5 years from now. Without the changes proposed by this committee and made with bipartisan support, Congress tells the American people that taxpayers should support fraudulent payments. Are we seriously debating a 2% reduction that centers on fraud elimination and ensuring those that we actually, instead ensuring those that we actually want to help qualify? This Farm Bill eliminates advertising for food stamps, eliminates recruitment, bonuses, and payments to lottery winners, all of which divert funds away from the program's actual goal. Any individual can apply or reapply by simply meeting the income and asset requirements. These are simple common sense reforms that save taxpayers billions and continue to protect those truly in need. I ask my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I ask unanimous consent to insert on the record CBO's statement that shows SNAP, the number of people on SNAP going from 47 million to 34 million over the next 10 years.
The gentleman's request is covered by General Lee.
I yield 1 minute to the distinguished Democratic leader, Ms. Pelosi.
General Lady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding, but more importantly, I thank him for his outstanding leadership for helping us live the Bible here in the Congress. He has been a relentless, dissatisfied, persistent champion for feeding the hungry in America and throughout the world. He is the living example, a personification of the Gospel of Matthew. And I appreciate your comments that you made earlier about priorities and the least of our brethren. I thank you, Mr. McGovern, for your leadership day in and day out as chair of the task force on hunger and working with Congresswoman DeLauro as an appropriator who shares your value on this subject. You've both been magnificent. And I thank you as a mom, because we all have our motivation for going into politics or deciding that we're going to run for office, and my motivation can be described in 3 words: the children, the children, the children. As a mother of 5 myself and as a grandmother, I know how children thrive when they have the attention, the love, the food, the care that they need. And it always is a wonderment to me that in this, the greatest country that ever existed in the history of the world, that 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 children goes to sleep hungry at night. And so it's another wonderment to me why we would even have to have this conversation on the floor of the House as to whether we as a nation are prepared to feed our children. We're all familiar with the comment, "From the mouths of babes." From the mouths of babes. It's usually followed with, sometimes, "come gems." In this case, from the mouths of babes comes food. Food to live, to be sustained, to be healthy, food to study and do well in school, food to have respect in their family and with their friends and all the rest. What's really interesting about it, though, for all the sentiment that is involved about feeding the children of our country, it makes economic sense to do so as well. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, says that rate increases of SNAP benefits is one of the 2 best options to boost growth and jobs in a weak economy. For every $1 invested in the SNAP program, for every dollar invested in that initiative, $1.70 is injected into the economy for economic activity. This purchasing power given to families who will spend it immediately because this is a necessity, this purchasing power injects demand into the economy, creating jobs. Don't take it from me. The Congressional Budget Office says this is one of the two best ways to boost growth. Another economic aspect of this is that, as has been said over and over again, nearly 20 million children, not only 20 million children are the beneficiaries of food stamps. And why do those families need food stamps? Well, some of them are families that are making the minimum wage. In fact, if you are a family of 4 and you have 2 wage earners, Mr. Chairman, the income you make from 2 wage earners making the minimum wage still has you below the poverty line and eligible for food stamps. 2 wage earners making the minimum wage cannot afford to put food on the table, hence they qualify for food stamps. These food stamps in some ways are subsidizing an unfair too low minimum wage in our country. So, speaking of the children, I hope that one of the other things we will do here is to raise the minimum wage, because that is the decent thing to do. But many of the same people who want to cut food stamps, in fact 2 million families out of food stamps, are just the same people who are opposed to increasing the minimum wage. So it's a question of fairness, it's a question of decency, it's a question of respect for all of God's children. It's also a question of doing the right thing not only for the children, but for our economy. $1.70 of economic growth injected for every dollar spent on food stamps. Now, to cut food stamps and therefore reduce that economic growth might be considered one of the least smart ideas that you will hear here. But there is so much competition for that designation that it just fits comfortably among initiatives to suppress the wages and to cut food stamps. It's all part of a package, and it is not a pretty sight. That's why, Mr. McGovern, your relentless, persistent, dissatisfied advocacy is such a beautiful thing in this arena where people think it's take very lightly cutting 2 million people off of food stamps. I urge our colleagues to support the McGovern amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The lady yields back. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized. Mr. Chairman, I yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway, 1 minute. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong opposition to the gentleman's amendment. The Ag Committee has worked diligently in a bipartisan manner to craft these reforms to the food stamp program that this amendment would strip out totally. The argument that somehow we can food stamp our way into a great economy is a bit false, in the sense that it doesn't reflect that we're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that we're putting into the program. The families that the previous speaker spoke at will still remain on food stamps. If you qualify on the income and the asset side, you'll stay on the program. If you make too much money to qualify directly for food stamp, those are the folks that we'll be getting at as part of the $20 billion that we'll save in this program. It's a 2% reduction. I'm hard-pressed to understand that we could have a near 5% reduction in the beneficiaries by cutting only 2% of the spending. We'll trim it from $80 billion a year to $78 billion a year. Much of the conversation you'll hear in justification for not going along with these reforms would sound like we're gutting and destroying the entire program. We are not. These are modest reforms that we believe are appropriate at this time, and I urge my colleagues to vote against the McGovern amendment and support what the Bipartisan Committee on Agriculture did.
From Massachusetts is recognized.
And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to a great leader on this issue, the gentlelady from California. I want to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lee, who's been a champion on this issue, and proud that she's here.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Let me thank Congressman McGovern for yielding, but also for your tremendous leadership, not only in preserving our safety net, but your tireless work to eliminate hunger, which really should be an oxymoron in America. I'm a proud co-sponsor and rise in strong support of this amendment to safeguard hungry children and families across America. Mr. Chairman, this farm bill would make heartless and harmful cuts to our nation's frontline defense against hunger, the SNAP program. Oftentimes, people need a safety net, a bridge over troubled waters to help them through difficult economic times. And yet these huge cuts come even while they preserve wasteful subsidies for huge agribusiness who really don't need corporate subsidies to continue with their huge profits. Taking away food from hungry children hurts their health, their educational outcome, and restricts their economic prospects for their entire adult lives. And the federal government will end up paying more for their health care and their education and get less revenue from their taxes. As a former food stamp recipient, I know for a fact no one wants to be on food stamps. People want to work.
Oklahoma is recognized.
People want to work and they have
The gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Chairman.
I yield the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Dr. Yoho. Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma. Mr. Speaker, I stand in opposition to Mr. McGovern's amendment because the amount removed from the food stamps program will not remove 1 calorie off of anyone's plate that deserves it or requires this assistance. And I know the importance personally of having to go on food stamps. When my wife and I first got married, we were 19 and a half. The economy was the interest rates in the economy went to 20%. And we had to get on food stamps for a short period of time. So I understand the need for those. But yet, let's look at the facts here. Out of the whole bill of $940 billion being spent over 10 years that's we're looking at here, 80% of that goes to this food stamp program, which is approximately $752 billion. 80% of the farm bill is going to that. Only 20% is actually going to the farmers. And we've cut that drastically over the last couple years. And so this is just a common sense approach of reducing the amount of money that we're spending in this country. And I stand in opposition of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. DeLauro, can I, after, that's fine.
Let me just say to my colleague a few minutes ago who was up on this floor and talking against the food stamp program and against the McGovern amendment, I think it's important to note this is not my making this up, but this is an individual who has received almost $4.7 million in farm subsidies since 1995, including nearly $1.2 million in direct payments. Now, I don't know whether that is a program that is means tested, that's asset tested, and that has a cap on it. No, this is free money for people who serve in this body. And these are the same folks who want to cut the food stamp program. I rise in strong support of this amendment to replace those deep cuts to the food stamp program, which is our nation's most important anti-hunger program. All across the country, cities, suburbs, rural communities, from the coast to the heartland, nearly 50 million Americans are struggling with hunger, and almost 20 million of them are our children. No part of the country is immune. We should not destroy what has been a long-standing bipartisan tradition to give crucial nutrition assistance. This is what this farm bill does. It cuts out the nutrition program for 2 million people, 1 million of whom are children. And the research has shown us that the food stamp program is the most effective program pushing against the steep rise in poverty. 99% of recipients live under the poverty line. They're not getting $4.7 million in subsidies from the federal government. You want to talk about the food stamp program, by the way, when my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, this is a program with a 3.8% error.
And the noes are 322. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 25, printed in Part B of House Report 113-117 by the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, on which